They say that there are 3 levels of conversation. Level 1 is when people talk about other people. Level 2 is when people talk about events. There's nothing wrong with either of those, but this is Level 3 Studio. Level 3 is when people talk about ideas and what is possible. Welcome to another episode of Level 3 Studio. I'm joined by always Ruby, Sam, Pat, and we have 2 amazing guests today. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here. To my right, Aaron Folk, the LinkedIn. I didn't know what I was supposed to put after that. I stopped.
No,
I think we ran out of.
yeah,
that was it. LinkedIn. That's it. That's all that matters. LinkedIn. The Kim Kardashian of Kansas City public speaking. I like that. That's got some flavor to it. And to her right, David Gilbertson, KC by way of Iowa, man trying to figure it all out, son of God.
Amen.
I'm pumped that both of you. I'm pumped that both of you are here. I really am super excited both of you are here. So to answer I'll start by answering your question. My point in doing all of this is to try to spread truth. I think that's the point of us doing most anything, but to try to spread truth and spread honesty and spread purpose. And I was really inspired by our conversation of just how do we wrestle with the nuances that is America and that is Kansas City. And I realize as I continue going forward that somehow I have a way in wrestling with those nuances and pulling people together, but I do not have all the information. So I wanted to pull you in to really help add context as we wrestle with these things. Cool. So, yeah. Are you from Kansas City, Aaron?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
When I was a kid.
Okay. And growing up, what was...
So we moved here after my parents went through a bankruptcy in Colorado. So it was pretty interesting when we got here because we moved to Kansas City, Kansas, actually where you're a teacher,
KCK.
right? From a very small town in Colorado. So I think it was kind of a culture shock to my father, who I'm pretty sure had probably...
I don't mean to age you, but what year did you...
It's cool. I'm cool.
Okay.
I'm 39
Okay,
now,
okay.
so-
What year did you move to Kansas City, I mean?
When I was 8. I don't do math.
You don't know the year? I'm trying to put in my
I
mind,
was
like,
8.
where we're at as a country, as a city.
31 years ago.
Okay.
So my grandmother lived in a townhome in Kansas City, Kansas on her own, and in close to the Turner District, but Kansas City, Kansas. And so I think that was a very big culture shock. So that year we ended up moving 3 times, I think, until my parents felt comfortable. So it was like rental house to rental house. Ended up going to high school eventually in Gardner. After they tried everything. We even homeschooled, which I'll keep my opinion on that. Just don't do it in just junior high if you're ever going to do it. Went to KU, went buck wild because I had been very sheltered. And then ended up in Texas with just me and my 6'8" black boyfriend, which was a whole nother culture shock.
Okay.
In Grand Prairie, Texas at the time.
For you or him or both?
For both of us.
Okay.
Yeah. He's from St. Louis and I was from Kansas City.
Okay.
And I think that as many issues as we have here, they have a lot more there. So we didn't think through moving to the South and what that, we just saw opportunity because Grand Prairie's right off of Dallas. So that was interesting. He's still one of my best friends to this day. And then we had also never lived in the same city, so we just didn't work out as a couple in the same city, right?
Yeah, it was only long distance up to that point?
Well, he was a basketball player at MU.
Okay.
And so there was also a lot of glitz and glamour in that. So then when you're like paying the bills and living in the same place and everything, it's a whole different thing. Still one of my best friends. First call I made when I got engaged to my husband, but ended up pregnant. So moved back here thinking I'd be closer to family. Like to learn all my lessons twice. So I had a second kid out of wedlock.
Like the best of us.
So then was a single mom here for the past 12 years, and I just got married. So now just here.
So now back, in KC, feeling it out.
Kansas City, yeah.
David, by way of Iowa, huh?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Cedar Falls, Iowa, which is like a small town for any KU fans who are watching. University of Northern Iowa is one of those small schools that knocked KU out of the tournament back in like 08 or something. So
Better get your rep.
a small
take credit.
A small liberal arts town, so a university in town, 30,000 people. There's a former city that's kind of been dwindling. It's sort of a post-industrial. Used to be like I think there might still be a manufacturing plant there, but 60,000 people. So 100,000 people in this general sort of like 2-town, 2-city region is what we'd call it, but it's about the size of like an Independence or like a Lee Summit, a little bigger than Lee Summit. But yeah, born and raised there, went up through school, kind of found my way to art and graphic design, found out about those, and then went to an in-state college for that, and then came down to Kansas City because I knew I didn't want to stay in Iowa. It was a great place but I wanted to go out and adventure a little bit more. And basically any place that I had a friend that had a couch was on my search. But even that, it was still kind of like Colorado to Chicago. It was kind of like I hadn't gone full to the coast. But then I just kept coming down to Kansas City to catch concerts and shows. And I think right before I moved here, there was like 2 really, really mild winters. Nothing like this winter. I'm like, this is great. There's no winters down here. So then I came down and been here since 2006.
Gotcha.
So yeah, and then just worked in a few different capacities and environments, and slowly but surely, it's like Kansas City in a lot of ways. It's like the people get a hold of you. I think
it grows on you.
Like there's not a thing of geographic, like
why are we here, right?
Right? Yeah. Like there's not even like, I mean, I guess we have a river, right?
We don't utilize it very well.
Yeah, but no one's going down and looking at the river and thinking about how great life is. But yeah, it's just like slowly the neighborhoods, the community, the people got a hold of me, and I've been here about 3 years, and I was super close that I was going to bounce to New York. I was thinking about it, and then just God got a hold of me, and more people, more relationship, and then again, I think 3 years after that, I was kind of thinking I was going to move on, and then I met my wife, and now we got 3 little boys, and
now you're definitely not.
Now we're here. Now we're here. So
I
don't know if it's where I'm going to be for forever, but it's where I'm at for now, and I've slowly fallen in love with the city and all the brokenness and
that comes along with it. All the brokenness. We won't jump in that fast. So
and it's not only brokenness, right?
Yeah. Yes. What's it, raising kids in Kansas City? How do you feel about it? What are you most excited about? And then what kind of makes you, what do you wish they had the experience to have that they might not get here?
Well, I'll just start. Part of what I love about it, and I'll start with that since I feel like I led with the brokenness of Kansas City. But what I love about it, we live up on the west side, and we live in a mixed income condo unit. So there's rent controlled, and then there's fully subsidized or highly subsidized housing. But not just that, but there's a lot of diversity in our neighborhood. There's very few living here for, I guess it's almost 13 years now, living here for a good part of
all in the west side?
No, but just Kansas City.
Okay.
There's, for as much diversity as there is, there's very few avenues where you get much intersection of that. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of natural or designed segregation that's just sort of happened. So that's part of what I love about the west side, and that's what I love about the northeast as well, is that there's some actual intermingling of socioeconomic and racial groups. And I think those are 2 of the most vibrant neighborhoods in the downtown area. And there's flaws with all that as well. So I love that my boys are getting raised in an environment where they're best friends right now. It's not even a thing. They're just like,
it just so happens to be.
Yeah, it is what it is. And it's cool that those are the kids coming over for their birthday parties. It's tricky because I have a little bit of an old fashioned part of me as well that just feels like we're all designed to be living off the land, living in clay houses and just living off the land of just living more in line with the seasons and stuff as well. So there's always that little bent as well of I feel drawn to live and be a part of the city, but then part of me feels like we're all designed to be getting our water from a well and playing in the grass.
Back for it, David, but I do think that we need way more community gardens.
For sure.
Aaron, what's it like raising kids in Kansas City?
Well, so I get a couple different perspectives, right? Because when I had my son and he was 1 and his dad wasn't around, he was in and out at that time. He hasn't been around for years now. But I was making $10 an hour with a kid, right? And no other income. So for me, it wasn't an option to move anywhere else because there's very few places that you can raise a kid for $10 an hour and give them a home, I was able to do all of it without taking assistance from anywhere. And it's not that I had any feelings either way about assistance. I just don't think I knew, right? I was just
I got to figure out how to write, yeah.
So I was able to actually find us a 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, it wasn't easy. It wasn't, and this was really before you looked on the internet for it. I had to find daycare. I had to be able to feed them. And I was able to do all of that on $10 an hour, which you just can't do anywhere else, right? Yeah. And now, kind of same thing. So I got to the point that I was able to put my kids in private school. And I think that it wasn't even like really a thought process. I was just moving so much that there was a small Christian private school by us that after years of paying daycare, you're just like, it's the same cost as paying daycare, so you get used to it. So I had him in a private school for a couple years just because I didn't know where I'd end up. And then some stuff happened at the private school. Essentially what happened is they decided to teach that being gay was wrong, but without, and I get it, it's Christian private school, but I just felt like as the parents, we should have had the
had that
heads up
conversation?
that was
Yeah.
going to be the conversation that day. It was kind of, when you're already annoyed with something and then there's like that
Last thing you want to
straw.
hear. Yeah.
And I'm like, so that's how that year had been. We'd been there 3 years, I think. And I got a call. My son was in the principal's office because he, of course, raised his hand. He's like, I'm pretty sure you're just born this way. Like, it's not an option, right? Me being his mom, he knows when to speak up when he doesn't think things are right. And so we had actually lived in the same house for quite a while, where we still live. And you can see the school across from our house, but we had never even, we're on a busy street, so we didn't have much of a community over there, right? Kids aren't playing in the street because it's so busy. So that day I went over to the school and I was like, so stupid. I'm like, can I have a tour? And they're like, this is public school, you don't get a tour. And so I was like,
Wow, that was
all right, what's it cost to go here? And they're like, it doesn't. And I was like, we're in. We're totally in. And so we went that next year, and I had no idea. So I live in Shawnee Mission, which most people think of as like Johnson County, the more money. Let me tell you, we're not that part of Shawnee Mission, but I didn't even realize like that there were so many apartments around us, right? And so my kids are white, and at their school, they are the minority, which has been very eye-opener because they weren't the minority at private school. There were some kids from other countries, and that was about it when it came to diversity. But now they're the minority, and I didn't know how much they got about it. Like we would, my daughter in kindergarten, she's like, my friend, she has that darker skin, and she like that's how, or my friend, I think that his mom speaks Spanish. Like those were her explanations. And then last year for spring break, I was like, I have an aunt who lives in Montgomery, so we went to Montgomery to visit her just because it's cheap when you have somebody you can drive there. Right, yeah. You're still going to do spring break. And so I had done some research, and we decided to go visit her, and we made sure to do the Rosa Parks Museum and the Martin Luther King Church. And so my daughter's 5 at the time. I have no idea how much she's like soaking this in. And so the Martin Luther King Church, which I don't know if you guys have been there, but it's like you have to put it on your list to go there, because when you walk into Montgomery, it's already like you're 40 years ago, right? Like the whole feeling is very different. But we had just gone to the Rosa Parks Museum, and then we went to this church, and there's people from all over the world, and it's spring break time, so there's more people probably than usual too. But so they go on tours of like 20 people, and they had us go around and say why it was important for us to be there. And my little 5-year-old's shy, so I don't think she's going to talk. And it gets to her, and we're one of the last, and she's like, so me and my best friend Erin can go to school together. Well, Erin's a little black girl, right? And I didn't understand that
she was processing.
Yeah, it all soaked in. So for me, where we're at in Kansas City, it's making a huge difference in my kids' lives. I think if we were in another Shawnee Mission school, probably closer to like in the East District, in that area, they probably wouldn't be in the same place. But for us, I mean, it's cost efficient. I just got married after being a single mom for 12 years, and like I said, I haven't had to take assistance, right?
Yeah, this is
so
pretty
it's
good.
Pretty good. And for us, there's the community. I think at the end of the day, like as a single mom, I've also had so many hands helping because I've just been able to make friends with like really good values and really good motives and stuff like that.
West Side, Shawnee Mission, like at what point did you recognize the city, like as you notice like there's this intentional division and kind of naturally as we self-select into our own communities, but at what point did you put the dots together and say, okay, Johnson County is Johnson County, there's this West Side that went through, like when did you start to frame it like in a way where you could recognize how it was divided and put into subgroups?
I think for me, I moved here in 2006, and I first moved just off the plaza just because, like, being pretty new. My friend didn't live far from there as well, and it seemed like there's always people around. I just kind of wanted to be in a city.
Yeah.
And, like, that was the best. Even at that time, the downtown wasn't really a thing. Crossroads.
It was your best bet.
Yeah, that's the best place that seemed. And then, like, after living there, it's like if you don't make $1 million and you're going shopping at like Armani Exchange every weekend, it's like the plaza's not really I mean, you can go and walk.
You can still walk around.
Yeah,
right?
you can walk and like look and people watch and like, eat at some restaurants or go to the movies, but like it's not where I'm going if I need a T-shirt. You know what I mean? And then I shortly after that worked for a minority-owned business in the West Bottoms. And I think that is when I started to learn a little bit more about Kansas City's history.
So you were working in the West Bottoms in about 06? Or this was later?
08, 07.
Okay.
07, yeah, I think. Yeah, and it was a short stint. But what I learned about that was just what you guys have talked about on your podcast. Some of the minority-owned businesses come in on like a portion of a contract. You know, so if a big builder is coming in and they get multi-million dollars, but a portion of that contract says they have to work with a minority-owned contractor or whatever. So the man I was working with had some contracts like that. So I learned about some of how that works. Mm-hmm. And also around that time is when I just started to get into the history of like J.C. Nichols and how the plaza even came to be and some of the history of that. I don't know.
Did something spur that? Like, was there something intentional, or was it just like the narrative came up? Like,
I can't remember specifically how I found out about it, but I've always been curious. I mean, you brought Martin Luther King Jr. We were talking before about Real Recognize Real. I remember being exposed as many, you know, I graduated in 2001 from high school. So in like the 80s and, you know, early 90s, there was a lot in like public school curriculum, or at least in Iowa, around equality and, you know, togetherness and like harmony, things like that. But I just remember being exposed to Martin Luther King Jr. in elementary school, and it just like resonated with me, where I'm just like, that guy, like he's speaking truth, right? Mm-hmm. Like truth breaks through and cuts through. And that's obviously based and rooted in love as well. But that planted some early seeds. I can't remember if we talked about this, but my dad was always into oldies music. I came of age in hip hop, but I realized there was like the soul of hip hop that I'm actually into is stuff that's sampling like old Sam Cooke, you know, like stuff with a good backbeat, and it's like that's just as soulful. So it's like a Kanye sample of Nina Simone. It's like, how much credit can we really give Kanye when he's sampling like Nina Simone? It's like that's a soulful cut that he's pulling from, and then he does his Kanye thing on top of it. But anyway,
which could be a lot of things.
So that sort of like civil rights, equality, and just like truth was something that was planted pretty early on with me, and then, you know, hearing about something with like J.C. Nichols in Kansas City, it's like you pull at that thread. Someone could hear about J.C. Nichols and be like, hey, whatever. But I think I'm always been prone to ask that next question, maybe. Yeah. I'm just kind of curious with that. So then I find out about it. I'm like, that's crazy that there's a whole trolley system. And then there was essentially like a departure from like a very busy commercial district downtown, and then this sort of like white flight, and you can only get there by automobile, is my understanding of it. It's been a while since I've looked into it. But that it was kind of structured around, like, hey, we're gonna sort of separate ourselves from, you know, a less desirable thing. You could say it's socioeconomical or it's purely racial or whatever it might be, but just seeing some of that underbelly of things in Kansas City is probably when it first started online with me, and then learning about truth and just kind of the dividing line. That was probably in 2009 when I came to the church that I was a part of, learning about just like by the numbers. And I don't know if it's as stark as it once was, but like infant mortality rate, household income, like what that looks like literally one block to the next with across the Truce Divide. It's staggering. And then I think a few years later, this probably wasn't until I learned about Ivanhoe District from my friend Daryl Answer. He's planted in the Ivanhoe District, and just learning about the 71 corridor and that coming through, and what that did for the displacement of, I think it was like tens of thousands of families, and the long delays in construction with that, just like uprooting like whole neighborhoods and whole communities, and the long effects that's had since.
I got it. Like, I seriously do not think I got it until, because even when I moved back, when I found an apartment that was $500 a month with 2 bedrooms, it happened to be in Johnson County, but it was just the one I found.
Okay.
Right? Like, my kid wasn't in school, so I wasn't like necessarily looking.
I see, okay.
I was working in Westwood, so I was just looking around where I worked. So I found this like random building. And then it more became, okay, we lived there for so long, now they're going into school. So it was never like a deliberate choice. It was just what we did. But I still honestly don't think I knew a lot of it, because I just think I was so ignorant, and I haven't had to deal with it personally, right? Like, I have a ton of friends, and we've never had these conversations.
Yeah.
And then 2 years ago, I got asked to sit on the Hispanic Chamber of Kansas City, Missouri's board. Okay, so when I started going there, that's when I learned about the minority contract. So I just become a business owner, and I was lucky because I was single mom. So everybody was like, I had my own like struggle. And so people were like really embracing that story and embracing me and saying, here, I think my difference kind of what you said, how like there was just always something in you. I grew up a pastor's daughter. And I don't know how much, I know you said you're a son of God, and I go to church every Sunday now. Okay?
She's like, look.
But I don't know how much you've
Feeling
seen.
the wrath over here. She feels some energy of the wrath.
I don't know how much you've seen behind the scenes of churches sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of churches do it wrong. And so what I saw was, what I grew up in was this very facade family. And on the back end, it looked nothing like the front end, right? And so to me, it was always like, I mean, it's no different than what's going on with the president right now, right?
Yeah,
like we say, why are all of the Christians supporting all the divorces and the naked wife and stuff? Had any different, like a blue label behind it, right? Or I think blue's Democrat, yeah. So that has been my whole life. So I've always been like, if people are nice to you, just be nice to them. If they're real, just take that for what they are until they do you wrong. And I think it was more like, just getting so tired of that like show and knowing I couldn't put on that show, which I still can't. When you're a business owner, a lot of people expect for you to put on this show, especially as a woman business owner, right? And that's where that funny Kim Kardashian of Kansas City, like, I still can't put on a show.
Right.
And so I think mine was and I just started learning the history, which is so crazy because I grew up here, but I also didn't have any questions because I grew up here, right?
That's such a big point that you make, like, unless you have had to feel it, because there's a million things, right? Like, there's so many things I don't know because I haven't had to feel it. But then I'm at the point, like, okay, how important is it that if you are, I draw the boundary of our city. Like, if you live outside of this boundary line of Kansas City, Missouri, I give you a break. But if you live in the city, I think it's important that you know the narrative of your city.
Yeah.
It so happens to be 99.9% of those cities have a very racial, discriminatory, disenfranchisement history. Yeah. So I think that that's really important. But I want you to finish your thought. So you 2 years joined the Hispanic Chamber. What was the thing that happened?
Well, I just started learning about the contracts, and then through that, and I have a girlfriend. She's white, but she has a space over so I started looking at real estate for myself. She has a space over in the Prairie Village Shops, which was originally a J.C. Nichols, right? And so when she's talking to me about, she's just so stressed. We do her marketing, and so we start talking about taking her stuff online, and she's like, I can't afford to take my stuff online. I'm like, it is 2018, we got to talk about this. And she's like, no, the way my real estate contract's written up, I have to give a percentage of every sale to my landlord. And I went to somebody and I was like, is this a thing?
A percentage of every sale?
So she pays a ridiculous amount of rent. She has to pay like the taxes and everything, and then a percentage of all sales. And that was one of the J.C. Nichols ways of doing business. And that was originally a J.C. Nichols location, right? Where they were taking parts of sales and as well as this major rent and really kind of controlling the city. I had no idea that was even, and it's still a thing that a lot of people are doing. Now, there's a lot of people that aren't doing that anymore, but over there in the Prairie Village Shops, and that's kind of what the plaza they've been able to get who they didn't want out and stuff like that. So I think it really wasn't until I was a business owner. Now, I think that you probably, when I went to Dallas, I learned a lot more about the Dallas history because you do the research on where to live and
yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you live within the boundary of your city, and I think like then again the same other side of that, 99.9% of the suburbs are then a causation of white flight, but they don't have necessarily a strong enough history, I think, like what suburbs started in the 60s. So, and most of them are pretty segregated and just have their short history of like building suburbs pretty quickly, building schools, few issues, like racial, like racism, like maybe 1, 2, 3, 5 people at a time, but not like tens of thousands of people historically being impacted. And so that's why I think that's really important. Like if you live in a city that where 9 times out of 10, your city was created because, or was fueled because of the Industrial Revolution. People sought jobs simultaneously around, not getting very historical here, but like World War II, right? People come back looking for jobs. A lot of black people are now leaving the South. So a lot of the cities that we have started with very mixed racial groups and lineage of racial groups. And so that's why I think like it's important for you to know your city, because we all are living daily, like this building we're in. Like, who knows how old this building is, and who knows what's happened here? And like, I think that that's really important. And so like, that's why I want to know, like, what was your first encounter with it? But now, like, knowing what you know, to whatever extent, like, is it a daily conscious, especially on the West Side? There's a lot of people have very different stories or perspectives of how the West Side has developed and what it used to be. And like, is that a daily conscious narrative of living on the West Side?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of it, and obviously, it's tricky because I've had these conversations before of like, I feel drawn to want to go and be a part in living in a neighborhood where there's going to be some integration of or intermingling of racial and socioeconomic. But can I, as a college-educated appearance as a white male, can I move into a place and not have that be a tick towards gentrification?
Yeah.
And I think some of that is where I'm settling with it is like, if I come into it and I actually try to be a partaker and a participant of the culture and the community that's already happening, versus like, I come because the rent is cheap and I don't frequent any of the businesses. I don't try to support that stuff. And I'm like longing for like whatever the thing that I see is like more the thing. It's like, why did I move here? Did I move here for the people and the culture that's already happening? Or am I moving here for it's cheap and then I'm hoping, I mean, I'm just going to throw out like Starbucks or something. That,
I was going to say
you know what I mean? Like, I
didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to say Starbucks.
But then there's a whole different way of it too, because there's a whole, I don't know. And I don't want to get critical with it. I do wrestle with some of this stuff of like, what does it look like to actually partake of this and to live and bless, and not with any sort of savior mentality, not with like, I have the fix, but just to come and be a partaker. I've been blown away by my neighbors. I think I maybe talked to you about this, like Iraqi, African, and Mexican descent, and like the hospitality and the generosity. You know, like I'm trying to live my life of like to love people with all my heart as I've been loved. And like white culture has so much to learn from it's called like warm cultures, like people that are like, yep. And some of that is built out of necessity, and some of it's just been baked into like the DNA of like people groups of like, we band together. We're going to give you our last meal if it's the only thing we got in our cabinet, because that's just what we do. I think my dad had some of that too, but like there's a little more carving against that in typically like white culture. So I do wrestle with some of that stuff and I think about it, but I think the fact of the way we're living there and the choices we're living feels like I'm not giving myself a pass, but I feel clean with it. But on the West Side, there are like $1 million high rises right next to, you know, rundown 1940s bungalows, you know, and there's a house up on the top of the hill, and I was like, man, I love this location. It's a rundown house. It could be a fixer upper, and it's selling for like $700,000. And it's because of the land, and it could get split up into separate parcels, and it's someone who's been in the neighborhood for a really, really long time, but it's like they kind of see it as a payday. Like I could really, someone's willing to pay like how much for this little house that was one bathroom that we raised our 6 kids in.
Blame them?
No, I can't.
Like, If they,
and that's where like gentrification and the ebbs and flows. It's like, I mean, it's people. It's not just like market shifts, when money shifts out here. Downtown was dead, and then stuff filled in, and now like downtown's filling back up. It's like, I don't know. Now is like the play, like go live in the suburbs to be like real, you know? Downtown's too gentrified now, so it's like
man. It's happening quickly though. Is there, if you don't have an opinion, it's perfectly fine. But is there anything that like folks in the Troost area could learn from the West Side area? Because that's what I've been wanting to, and I may be drawing a lot of conclusions here, but I do think that there's some things that could be learned from the West Side 15 years ago to decisions people are making along Troost now about shift in communities. Like, from your experiences living there, what do you think? people should pay attention to?
I think there's a few things going on, and it's not for a lack of effort. There's been a ton, and I don't know everything that's been done, but I know there's just been a ton of initiatives to try to beautify Troost and to pour some money into it. I know the stretch, and that's the other thing. Troost is a big stretch,
street,
you know. The west side is geographically hemmed in, so and there's some of that keeps it, and the community's been pretty tight. I'll get back to Troost, but there's been developers that wanted to put a hotel or something up in the west side, but the community bands together and vote against it. I think there was a school, and they were going to try to turn it into some sort of. There's sort of some geographical stuff that keep development from happening. Like it can't all of a sudden become this commercial district. But that's part of what I think is difficult about Troost, because you say Troost, it's like, what section are we talking about? Are we talking from 12th Street? We're talking down, and I think it goes to 89th or something.
The one I'm looking at a lot right now, I'd say is like 27th to like 41st. Is what I'm really looking at. You know, like, okay.
And I just think there's a lot going on with it, and there's something I don't know exactly what is. I used to live right off of Troost on Harrison for like a few years, and it just felt hard. Like when I was driving up and down Troost, and it's like it's concrete, and it just feels a little soul crushing sometimes. But I noticed at one point, and I don't know how long it's been, but there's those huge power lines. They're like the bases are like these big metal structures. It has a very like industrial. It's like living next to a power plant almost. And there is a big power plant right down by the Brush Creek or whatever. But then it goes north and south from that power plant, and then maybe is one down again there in the south. I don't know how much of that plays a role of like it's actually like not good to live next to a power plant, right?
Unsafe,
But there might even be something to that. But I know that area a little bit north of the section you're talking about. That's one thing there's an art exhibit down in Downtown Library up in the upper floor called The City of Tomorrow. And it chronicles what happened when they built 71. And they show some photographs of like 12th and Troost. And it was like shops and people are out and doing it. And then they show it now. It's like, it's a dead little interchange of like, it's a way to get on to 71. So I think 71 plays a big role in some of that. But they have been doing a lot of stuff with like the Max line, and they're trying to do more with it. I don't know the latest of what's going on with the light rail, but I know at one point they were going to try to have it almost be like a hub, that one going east, one going south, one going off Troost, maybe two. But I think some of what's going on with Troost as well is that it's kind of something that plagues the city, where I didn't realize how much a city that straddles two state lines. I didn't know how much of a role that played, and it does, because people can work in downtown, but then they take their money with them to when they live in Kansas or vice versa. But then there's a real war from two states of like where money's coming from. The developments all over the place of like the airport's up here, because from my understanding, they put the airport there because they were forecasting that that's the way development was going to go. That it wasn't going to be airport, nothing downtown. They were planning that was going to be development, but then you got Swope Park and the zoo over here, and then you got the sports complex over here. So it's like, it just seems a little scatterbrained, but I think some of that is due to that we're on a state line, you know.
And the Applebee's story?
That they just bounce around wherever they can get a tax abatement.
So about 2 years ago.
Applebee's follows me on Twitter, by the way.
Does it? Hey,
Love Apple. Love Apple.
That's how much.
We can put like a free
apps.
to run around the city and do cool stuff.
How are ya?
The young man in me wants. Okay, we'll jump in a sec.
What? Yeah, I know. That's what they were just saying.
We'll jump in a sec. But the young like man in me like that wants to run around and just be cool and hip wishes like. We were St. Louis and had our baseball stadium downtown, and like the things made sense. And like Seattle, you can take the light rail from downtown to the airport, but I do recognize that.
It would change.
And I think I moved here. I can't remember if it happened right when I lived here. I think there was a vote in 05 or 06 to have it move, and it was shut down. And there's
the baseball stadium.
Yeah.
I think it was. I can't remember if it was going to be just on the North River or if it's essentially going to be like just east of like the financial district and like the governmental buildings.
Do you know why they did?
I just think that it's called the Show Me State. So like I think there's just a lot of people like the stadiums are there. It's happened.
Downtown wasn't like this either.
Yeah, it's happened with the airport too. I think it's some of the same stuff like. Yeah, it doesn't look great, but it functions, it works.
Is there a major problem is what people were saying?
Yeah, I just think
the answer
there's,
is no,
and I think there's some skepticism with Kansas City people. From my understanding, that's where Show Me State comes from, of like, there's a skepticism, a cynicism of like, I'll see it when I believe it type thing. And I think that's some of the like, why are we going to move it here? Who's profiting with the whole moving it thing?
Yeah.
Like, so I think there was just a little aversion to that. I look
see.
at it now, it's like, man, that would have been nice.
Yeah,
But
It's up for
good
another
time.
vote, isn't it?
Would have been good time. Is it?
I think so.
is it?
So, Aaron, getting to know your story a little more, it seems like a lot is like kind of revving up or changing, or like you're speaking up more, like you're being asked to speak more.
Yeah.
Like what, aside from, and we can dive in there too, but aside from like the hard-nosed business facts, like what do you really want to speak up a lot about right now based upon the experiences of where you've moved, of raising children, of being a woman-owned business? Like what do you want to speak up about?
So, okay, based off of what you just said and how you really got into the history when he asked, how do we do the West Side and Troost? And I don't have all the answers, but one things that I think that we don't do well addressing is that, have you guys ever heard of the Women's Employment Network? So it's a nonprofit in town that essentially works with women. You have to have at least your GED, and they will help you get your GED to get into their program. So you have to have at least your GED, but then I've met women in it that have their PhD. So I went as part of Junior League. It was like my placement. And I thought, I'm going to go in here and help these women do all of this stuff. And it was luckily the year I got pregnant for the second time, right? And so I've now volunteered there for 2 years. But I went in and I was shocked by these women. They were all these amazing women, no matter where. And there were quite a few that had their PhD. But like something happened. And I think with men a lot of times, there's kind of you've got this responsibility, right? Women, even in the workforce or stuff like that, you also have your family responsibility. And a lot of times when your parents get older, you have that responsibility and stuff like that. And it was shocking to me to see these women that had played major roles in major things. And, mom dies, kid gets a disease, husband becomes abusive, like all sorts of just like things that just completely shut these women down. And so I'd had that experience. And then through my business, I was very lucky that the charter school system that we have in Kansas City started paying attention. And we were able to really go into charter schools and talk to the students and help with some of the different charter schools on their marketing and stuff. And as we got into the marketing, I was like, what's the problem with retention there? Why are you guys, every year it's a retention issue at school? Because to me, I just couldn't get that. And the number one thing was there's just no stability. And a lot of times it was single women trying to raise their kids, having to find the next place to live, the next place to live, the next place. And they were trying to do what they could do for their kids, but every single time it came down to, but they don't know. They don't know. So they're just going to the next thing that someone's telling them they can do, and then uprooting their kids and
trying to stay afloat.
And so I think a lot of times we pour a lot of resources into kids, which I think is needed. I think we pour a lot of resources into like education of the areas. We talk about the areas. I don't think it matters because the minute we get Truist fixed, it's going to be a different place, right? And
The symptom, not the root cause.
and we're not
times.
figuring it out. And there are very few programs that address, and as a woman business owner, as a mom that was making $10 an hour, I didn't know where to go, right? There's very few programs, and I would have never known about the WIM program, which is one of my favorite programs in the world, but I would have never known that there was a program out there, right? And
You didn't explain much about what it was. So what do they
So,
do?
okay, so sorry. So they essentially, if you get into this program, and I think you just have to meet their bare requirements, they bring you in and they retrain you for the workforce. So everything from your confidence, working on yourself, how to interview, what you want to do, right? So like there's women that want to make jewelry. And so what does that look like? Do you become an entrepreneur? So we were able, that's really, since I've always kind of dominated that LinkedIn space, we were able to come in and like do the extra things that the program doesn't do, like maybe just work with you on the wording of your stuff. They also collect donations for like how you dress when you go on your interview, right? Because the last thing you're buying is yourself a business suit because you're just trying to feed your kids. Or you don't want to go try on a business suit places where they sell business suits because your confidence is so low. So essentially they teach you all these skills, but what they work on is the root cause is the confidence and what happens when that confidence and all that stuff. And I think that there's just not enough programs, and I think there's more coming, but that we don't address what the people that are the caretakers for all the people that are the next generation, what they're going through and what they've been through. And I have been very lucky to have a lot of women that have had some really bad struggles, have been through the foster care system in Kansas City on my podcast, and I ask the questions that I shouldn't, right? And you guys, it is shocking how many of these women have been through 7, 10, 15 foster care homes, and now they're execs, and every single time, what happened is one woman played a role. Never usually a family member, never usually their mother, but one woman played a role in saying, you matter, and you can do this, we'll get past this, and essentially put that confidence. And now these women are playing major roles in our city. And so I keep coming back to, listen, what if we were addressing not one out of every 500,000 people? We were addressing a lot of them. What could that look like?
Mental health is I'm 27, so it's like everything is like I'm coming to know as is. I don't have the reference of, 20 years ago it was like this, right? But we need to talk about mental health. Like we really, 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 really need it. But like, how? You know, like where do you guys, like in your, I'm curious in your workplaces, like how is it common language? Is it acceptable language? Is it recognition that we all have lived through trauma and experienced things and like, or like, what is that? Where is that at for your guys' sphere of influence?
I mean, I think so it's funny, like a lot of my colleagues, I feel like we're all the same, but they're like, I'm almost 10 years older than you. So it's like the same thing of like someone's like that I'm working along with. So I think I wouldn't say you're a younger generation, but those people that are maybe coming out of school a few years into the professional workforce, it's way much more front of mind in the culture right now. So whereas I wasn't thinking about anything mental health when I was in my mid-20s. It really wasn't in the public consciousness. But a lot of things have happened in the last 10, 12 years. Historically, I don't know all of what went into this, but they closed down. I think there was some legislation passed that ended up closing a lot of mental health and budgetary stuff. So a lot of the people that you see as homeless now formerly would have been in some sort of mental institution or some place where they're getting assistance for what they're struggling with. But instead, those things get closed. So then it's like a revolving door of people getting arrested on the street. The thing that's interesting is I feel like we're more, speaking of symptom and core, it's like we're more aware of it, but that like what's actually contributing to it, like our mediated society of like the screens. I cannot imagine being a junior high student with Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My friend that I went to college with, his sister was like, I think 7 years young. It maybe wasn't even that much. It was just like enough. When I came up, Facebook became a thing when I was a senior in college. And his youngest sister was coming up through high school, and it was like the drama follows you home. Like if you were a kid that got picked on, at least, I mean, and home probably isn't great for every kid that's getting picked on either, but like at least you're not getting bullied by the school bully when you're at home. You might be thinking through what they said, but then now it's like you're going home and you're seeing the message. You're getting pain. You get your hips vibrating. You see it, and it's like someone talking smack to you. So I can't even imagine that. And social media, and there's just so many studies about the detrimental from self-confidence to actual stress and fatigue, and what it even does to like your sleep cycle of like the blue light. You're staring at that phone, and then it's like you're wired and you can't sleep. And then the stress and everything that happens with that too. So the way we're consuming like this, all that we're doing, there's so much good that can happen from it, but there takes an amount of discipline. That's what led to the flip phone. Is like there's a level of discipline. I'm kind of someone that goes to drives hard at something, and like if it can be abused, I'm gonna find a way to abuse it. Like that's just kind of the way I'm wired.
So
like
you've learned to protect yourself.
Yeah,
I like that too.
like I go after it, and it's like if there's not enough foundation to support it, then it's like, okay, this thing, like what, which is ultimately what found my way back to God, was like I tried to tap into, I'm gonna make this my like whole source. I'm gonna make this my whole source, and none of that could sustain me, which is God found me out of that, and I found something that could support me. And so I think that's what I've realized with myself is like some people can have a really healthy relationship with Instagram. Some people can have a really good, healthy relationship with multiple devices and doing this. I'm someone who's prone towards like addiction and going hard on things. So it takes like setting up some strong boundaries. And I think we have to have that conversation. It's like how we're raising our kids too, of like, just
What makes
putting a
it-
2-year-old in front of a screen for 6 hours a day, like maybe isn't the best thing for their
Right.
development,
With the empathy that you have and able to be able to empathize with younger generation, what's the hardest part about, say, bridging the gap to older generations who kind of grew up on this, or just, work hard and get the job done type of?
I think that there is a level of, and I feel like I'm a bridge, and we're all prone to being like narcissists, right? Like it's all about me, it's all about self. I feel like that's something I'm seeing in the younger generation. I think it was formerly called like being entitled, like the stigma around millennials is like the entitlement. But I feel like I was raised with empathy. Like I was raised to like understand and to be in touch with things. But I think that too much can be crippling as well. Of like, because there is a time as like entrepreneurs and business owners, like, yeah, I can sit and talk about how I'm feeling with something. And there's times like, I got to go get this thing done.
Right, I gotta go get the job done.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's something that empathy is a good tool, and being in touch with your emotions is a good thing, and being aware, but you can get paralyzed with being over informed with things, or being over inundated with your own feelings or the world, which is also one of the stigmas of like the Instagram feed or the world news of like, it used to be like you would hear about the world news for the 1 hour, 6 to 7 or whatever on TV. And now it's like you're finding out about something in real time, a shooting that's happening here, a hurricane that's happening here. It's like, that's good to be informed, but it can also like rob you from having the real capacity to love your neighbor well, because you're like,
Because
there was a
emotional
shooting
exhaustion is
and
a real thing.
and it's like you're actually feeling the trauma of that, but maybe we're not designed to be carrying the trauma of something 7 time zones away. But there's good that can come from that as well. So it's a wrestle.
100%. Aaron.
Mental health question. Here we go. You ready?
Right. Here we go.
Okay, so in all honesty, I have struggled with mental health since I was very young. I've tried to kill myself on 2 different occasions. Now that I'm putting pieces together, I think it's a trait I inherited from my mother. We also don't have a relationship at this point because it was very, very toxic. So as far as my business, I made that kind of a priority. So one of the first things I did is I found a therapist that my business works with that all of my employees can go see and I never know about, so that they will go see. But the other part of that is that I'm very open with my employees about my mental health. And that's allowed them to be very open with me. And it's shocking to me how many of them do have some major anxiety. I have been on and off anxiety medicine for as long as I can remember. And there was a point just at the beginning of 2018, it was the end of 2017, 2018, where I think I worked so hard for so long, my body just shut down and I had to have gallbladder surgery, and it threw me into a pure anxiety thing. And so I couldn't even leave my house for a month while I was building this business. And so I just had to be very open, like, can you guys do this? Can you meet with them? I could stream in, but I could not, like, I was on so many dosage. My medicine dosage was so high that I couldn't even drive. And that was just last year, right? And so for me, it's been very interesting because I have a social media company. So like, I do see the benefits of having social media, especially when it comes to business. I also have a 12-year-old who has an iPhone 7. So where the benefits that I see is he had a little friend who tried to commit suicide already. They would not have caught her had all the kids not had phones and been able to get a hold of her parents, right? Hers was very much, it wasn't a bullying situation. It was just very much, she's just dealing with some struggles. I think her father, there were some issues there before he took off. And so I saw these kids all work together, and I'm very lucky that my kid and I have this amazing relationship that he comes to me about everything.
That's good.
Because I own the social media company, we also have screen times locked and stuff like that, so that he can make phone calls, if he's home by himself a little bit, but he can't sit on the phone the whole time. You can't pull anything when your mom owns a social media company.
You can't, right? Because you teach Elle the things he's trying to get away with.
Like, you want me to teach you how to do that better and I'm trying to be sneaky? So we've experienced that. It's also grown our community at our school because, like, Facebook now has a group, so parents can talk when they couldn't talk before, right? And so I've seen some of the pluses of it. Now, I do think it needs to be managed right. Again, I think that's an education of parents thing, right? I think that we're kind of skipping the whole parents and going straight, let's save the kids, but
Right.
we're just missing the
Who's
whole.
informing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who's in charge of that? I don't think mental health's going to get better. I think that at least the conversation's starting. I'm very open about it. A lot of people aren't very open about it. Because I've been so open about it, I've been able to hear about some amazing programs. I don't know if you guys know, Shawnee Mission Hospital has a program where if you just walk in, they'll check you in for a week, and there are
You stay there for a week?
You stay there for a week, no phone. Visitors, I think, after 3 days you can come in. I don't know. I haven't been through the program. I almost ended up in it, but I found about that because 2 major women CEOs in the city, when they knew I was going through this, they called and they said, I want you to check out this program. I've been able to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And people you would have never thought, right? Because they haven't been so open, but they were when the
Right.
time was right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think, I don't know. See, I also think when I was younger and I tried to commit suicide, if I would have had people to reach out to, like on social media, or seen that other people, so I can see some of the pluses of it. Not that there's not a ton of
Yeah.
negatives, but I see a lot of the pluses on it.
Yeah, it's.
I have one thing I wanted to say of just even thinking about kind of mental health paired with what you were talking about, young women who had gone through crazy experiences, but then there was always like one woman who intervened in their life. And my heart, and I haven't done anything with this, but it's something I just feel like I'm carrying, and I'm feeling this is men are even more reluctant to reach out, to admit, and then I think it's even, and this is paint with a broad brush. So I think women are a little more built towards like connectivity of like togetherness, whereas guys are like prone to just sort of bury and get through it. And then I think it's even more, the deck is more stacked for men of color to admit like a perceived weakness, to admit like I need help, or to admit like I don't know what's going on, to just kind of bury it. So I just see that happening with like a whole generation of men. And now I don't know what that's like for the younger generation. I don't know if as much of that, maybe the detriment of like classical masculinity, of like just silent stoic type and just like get through it. I don't know if that's as much felt with the younger generation, but that's just something I've seen of like young boys getting isolated into like, what do I do with who I am, and how do I do this in a healthy manner?
There's so many things I want to bring up now, but that last one might be the biggest, which is like teaching manhood, I guess, in a way. You know, like.
Well, I think we talked about
where
Jason
we're at with gender too. You know, and go ahead.
Well, I think we talked about Jason Wilson. He calls it the Cave of Adullam Transformational Academy, where essentially he uses the art of jiu-jitsu, of training these young men in Detroit, where he uses their real life context. Some of these kids like can't read, can't stay focused, and essentially the school's like put them on drugs, and he gets them to focus and to essentially like correct the things that are going wrong in their system, where they can actually stay focused through class, and then they're learning virtues and traits of what it means to be a man of virtue, a man of strength, how to stand up against the bully while not giving in, while also having some of the physical traits to like diffuse a situation if they need to.
Yeah.
But
What you said about, I don't know why this made me think of this, and this is kind of a little off base, but it's kind of the same. So I want to bring it up, and I want to get you guys' opinion on it, even though I'm not supposed to be asking questions.
No, please.
What
I
you
love when people ask, because it means you're comfortable enough to like, go ahead.
So I married a very white country boy, but before that, I think the boys that I dated, the 2 boys I dated before were black guys, right? And one of them, we would get into these like amazing conversations of upbringing and culture and, you know, race conversations and all of that. And he had a child, and he paid the mom directly, just for whatever she needed. He would pay directly, right? And with my second child, even though my son's dad's away, my second child, his dad's very good, and we run her almost like a business, right? Like, as in, we go through the state for child support. We get along very well, but like, if we can feel ourselves start to have issues, we go use the mediator at the courthouse and work it out. And so we got into a conversation about child support one time. And I was like, why don't you just, I think he was having some issues, and he's like, I've already given her so much money this month, I don't know why she needs more. And so my immediate was like, why wouldn't you just go through the state, let them say what it is, so there's no thoughts about it. You paid what you were supposed to, and everybody's happy. Comes straight out of your check, you don't even have to worry about it. And he's like, I could never do that. And I'm like, why? He's like, because all my friends would think that, he's like, what did he say? He said something like, the only way you end up doing that as a black man is if you have a baby with a white girl. And I said, well, what does that mean, right? Like, the state doesn't care what race you are for child support. They're taking their cut. They don't care. And he explained to me, he said in his culture, at least how he grew up as a black man, it was a sign of weakness that if you couldn't take care of your child and the state had to put you on child support. And that most black women that he knew had the same, like, you'll just pay.
Same kind of understanding.
Yeah, and that they didn't get the state involved. And he was like, it was just shocking to like have these conversations where I was like, that was never a question the minute we decided on both relationships. Now this one just never paid it, right? But in both relationships, like the minute you have a baby, you figure it out and we just do it through the court so that there's like, it wasn't a thought process not to get the state. And he said, I just remember him being like, you have to understand, Aaron, black men and white men have been taught very different ways to be men. So when you said to that manhood, that's what that reminded me of. Because I never even thought that was like in my
and that's
culture. I didn't think
that's multifaceted too, because that's getting into like how much do you trust the state?
That's what
Yeah,
I was
that's
it's,
what I'm
it's really trust in
The
there's
institutions.
there's a lot of nuances, but the first thing that popped in my head was trust in the institution, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
I'm trying to handle as many things as I can without the institution involved. Unless I'm about to die and I gotta go to the hospital, like that inherent like mistrust in the institution. Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've been at too. Like, now it's tricky, so I maybe don't have to work this way, but like every time I'm getting pulled over, like when I hear people of color talk about that, like that's the way I've felt it. Like I haven't felt like, this is great. I feel so safe right now.
Yeah.
Like now I'm not equating myself to this experience of a person of color getting pulled over, but like I've had a general skepticism over institutions as well. So I can relate with some of that struggle. And I can't remember if it was Cat Williams or someone who talked about that stigma of like, if you're on child support, like essentially like I don't hang out with people that are paying child support. And it was like, I think he was using it for multiple ways, but it like spoke to that same stigma you're talking about. But I think there's also, there's been a lack, and we talked about a whole generation, we were talking before we started shooting, of like the knowledge that didn't get imparted from a whole generation. I'm part of kind of the latchkey generation. Yeah. So it's like,
likewise,
both parents working, if there are both parents. And now it's like divorce wasn't even as common when I was coming up. That was a more of a rarity. So now kids going from living in two homes, it's just so much more the norm now. So I think there's a huge lack, and I think it works for females as well. But I think females are more prone to like gathering together and learning what it means to be feminine from their peer group and whatever. Whereas guys, it's like, they're figuring out by watching what's on YouTube, which I think is what it leads to some of the rise of these guys that like maybe there's some good in what they're sharing, but like Jordan Peterson, some of these guys that are speaking to Joe Rogan. Now these are all white men, but I do think it happens in entertainment and sports as well. I don't know if there is a African American like just speaker or a guy who like entertainer that has like podcasts and is just writing about what it means to be a black man, other than my guy Jason Wilson, who's just like killing it, and he's coming from a whole different perspective than Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan. But I think that there's just this ache and this need of like, I know like what I'm wanting to be is good. I don't know how to do it. And then I think there's a whole class of men who also never got it, that are some are really, really trying hard to carve out, this is what it means to be a man, and this is what it's going to look like for me to raise young men to be men of virtue, to be men of character, to be men that know how to love well, to work and to sacrifice well. But it doesn't just happen in its own anymore. And we're such a fragmented society now that it's like, it used to be the communities would keep it together. So it's like it would take a community to build a child, or take a tribe to build a child, essentially. But like we're so fragmented. So it's like you can even have a strong neighborhood now, but everyone has their own little room they go to. They have their own house they go to, and then everyone in the house has their own little room they go to, and we all have our internet connections,
devices
so it's like we're so connected, but we're fragmented at the same time. Yeah. So it's that back to the technology of like the give and take of it, that there's good with it, but I think it just takes discipline. And then it does take, like, there's so many good initiatives, but like you can't replace like the love of a mother, you can't replace the love of a father, and you can't mandate that. Like the state can't make that happen.
Yeah.
But I've thought about it. A couple things. When you were talking before, I was thinking that there are two. There's dealing with the people and seeing the people versus like numbers. You know, numbers is a spreadsheet, or it's so often the institution can look at humanity as dots and numbers, ones and zeros, and it's like the reality of that. It's like truth isn't a problem. It's like there's people that live. You know what I mean? So it's like. So oftentimes when money gets involved and power gets involved, it looks at it as a problem to be solved rather than like people and lives and families and men and women and boys and girls. So I think that there's a multifaceted angle to it. But I do think, and I'm more prone, I'm not finishing sentences, I'm more prone to seeing the individuals. There's a quote from G.K. Chesterton, I'm going to slaughter, but essentially says the problem with good and evil, it's like, it's right here in my heart. And so you talked about that. Do we reflect on that? Do we think about those things? And if you're not honest with yourself and not realizing like, I'm prone and capable of doing all the evil that I want to fight against. Like if you haven't done that,
you don't recognize you are equally capable of.
If I had the power, you know what I mean?
Would
like,
I be in the same? Yeah.
Yeah. Or how we would all like to believe we would be these noble rulers, but like power can corrupt too, right? So if you don't do that work, now that can be a heavy word to someone who's legitimately or feeling oppressed, right? To like wrestle with that. You got to wrestle with like the evil in your own heart. It's like, but like we see this, right? It's like, yes, we do see it. So there's a dual approach where it's like we have to actually reckon with some of the inherited and continuing going on institutional stuff at the same time recognizing like, but we're all people and we're all prone to like really bad things, especially if we have a level of like power control over another. I'm just thinking about the prisoner experiment back in Stanford, where it's like they were surprised by how corrupt the students got on one another in
like,
it was like in a day.
Yeah,
it was like crazy. They turned into like Nazi youth in like 12 hours.
You talking about the Stanford prison experience?
I think all these things just sort of bounce around. But like, so just that, recognizing that, I had talked to you, so that was kind of one thing, and recognizing the evil that we're capable of, and wrestling with that, really feeling that way. But then the other thing that I felt like is pertinent to what you're talking about, I was reading about Moses, and it was to what we had talked about, and we kind of talked about like the pyramid of power, right? It's like you can say like, man, I want to be. You couldn't give me enough money to be Mark Zuckerberg right now. I don't know the kind of like he has a different level of pain and things that he's wrestling with, and I don't actually want it. So the thing I'm kicking around a lot is like building your own tables, like, and there's an act of, and it's being in exile and essentially like building a different way, and that may be geographically, it may be withdrawal, or it may be like, hey, I'm in this system that supposedly I'm getting chewed up, but like we're going to do things different. That it's a quiet revolution. There's like violent revolution, and then there's a quiet like, you know what, I'm going to show up to work, but I'm going to do things a little different than the way you're telling me I have to do it. And we're going to have barbecues, and we're going to love one another, and we're going to share cars, we're going to share clothes, we're going to like give to one another, instead of waiting for like the government to decide like, hey, we're a socialist country now. It's like, if we really feel that way, like start living that way. Start living that way with your actual neighbors, with the money that you do have, instead of waiting for it to be mandated. Like you can start organically from the ground up, but recognizing that there are two. There's institutional things that if they are impeding good life and progress from happening, those have to get reckoned with. But then also recognizing that we do have a level of autonomy and control over like the choices we're making, the things
before someone forces us to do it. We only do things though until a lot of the time. I in my own life have only done things because someone forced me to do it.
That's not true. You're doing this right now.
That's very true.
That's not what I said.
One thing I get on myself a lot about is I'll wake up early when I have to be somewhere. But when it's up to me, I don't. I'm always like, oh, why are you more disciplined for someone else than you are for yourself? That's just like a really small example that I've been frustrated about lately. That's a lot, Aaron, but would you do you have right? I don't know where we go.
Circling back to the institution of the man and the woman in the house. So I get to have a total different point of view on that, right? Because I have one child who father isn't at all around. And then I have one child who we essentially, my husband and I are best friends with her dad and her stepmom. And I know my daughter won't see this, but her stepmom and I are taking her on a surprise trip for her birthday, right? Like that's not a normal thing. And why I know that's not a normal thing is because I have so many people saying, how do I do this? How do I do this? I randomly like opened up this Facebook page a few years ago, and it sat stagnant. It still pretty much sits stagnant. I feel a little bit more responsibility to post on it every now and then, but it said co-parenting done right. And it was when I was trying to teach myself and I couldn't find anything. So I was like, I'll do this and then try to get people's opinion. That was before groups. And in the past 6 months, it's grown over 2,000 people in the past 6 months, because people are out there trying to figure out how do I think people are over the not having ways to figure out how to do that. And, you know, like at the end of the day, the truth is at your high school, if things were going better at home, it wouldn't be as much on the teacher's shoulders, right?
It really
It just
wouldn't, yeah.
wouldn't be. So how do we figure out that from day one? And with that, like, which programs are there? I think as far as like government, like, I don't know, I brought up Alabama earlier, but it was, so I was living in this little world of who voted for Trump here in Kansas City, right? I really was.
It's a whole different conversation.
And then I went to Alabama and I was like, I found them. Like, I found all of them, right? And even like people I really love and their views on things, and me sitting there trying to go, but listen, and it wasn't mattering, right? Because their reality is so different than my reality that I couldn't figure out. I left like upset that I couldn't get them to see like what I think is a right point of view, right? And so one of the things that a family member and I'm not going to call her out, she is a Trump voter, but one of the things that we did agree on, because eventually sometimes you just have to agree to disagree, right? Especially when it comes to family, is that whenever something gets as chaotic as it is now, it leads to something better. So all the chaos that is going on right now, people at least are reacting to and saying, we're done with this. And at least it's starting conversations, and it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect in 2020, right? But at least it says, okay, now we're finding that we don't have to be talked to like this. Now we're finding we don't have to. I'm sure you guys both know Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Gary Vaynerchuk said on one of his podcasts a few weeks ago, like, he thinks that the time for women, minorities, people that have been oppressed, that now is their time. Like, and you'll see in history, there's been different times of people, and he said, as a white man, I see myself becoming more relevant every single day because people want to hear from people with experience, right? He said something about, and I don't want to quote him exactly, but at least he has the immigrant thing to say, listen, I have this experience, but as a white man, he sees his relevance becoming less and less every day because he believes people that have been oppressed get to have a voice finally, right? And so as crazy as everything is right now, I think a lot of it has to start with, like you said, like, we've got to figure out a way for people to say, how can I change it? And then give them, like, there can be programs, but they have to actually make a difference, right? Because you wouldn't have to be, I mean, that's awesome you're doing that with your students, but nobody goes into teaching because it's their job to raise them alone.
Yeah. It shouldn't be that responsibility. Yes, I think representation, to your point about like presidency, representation, to your point about the president, representation, let me slow down. Representation, yes. I am so happy and lucky, and I recognize how fortunate I was from, I think, I'm 27 now, so 25, yeah, so 17 to 25, I had a black male president, like, whenever I was trying to figure out what it meant to be a man.
That's all my daughter ever knew. Like, her friends.
Because she's what, 9, you said?
She's 6.
Oh,
so her
okay.
friends in first grade, the boys in her class, they don't know that that's not a thing that they couldn't do.
Right.
Because they recently did a thing, what do you want to be when you grow up? And her teacher thought it was so awesome that most of the boys, it's heavily Hispanic, but I think there's 3 little black boys in her class all said president because that's what they saw.
Yes, so representation, yes, is tremendously important. I remember celebrating in college, and when he won his second term, we were all in college, and like everyone got together and went to the union and celebrated. So representation is huge, but you're right to the point of, I think it made us think that racism was no longer a problem. You know, we're like post-racial society, what we were saying, now that I recognize is the language people were using. And now we're like, oh, okay, let's talk about some stuff. And so you're right. Like, that's where I settled to not lose my mind, is like, okay,
It's gotta be better
he's
after
causing
this.
us, right? He's causing us to he's causing us to have to talk about these things, and to actually face it. And it's like, no, putting one person in position to not solve all of our problems.
I feel like I have a little bit more of a say. You guys, my place where I vote, I usually run right in and run right out. And it's this little church across the street from my house. Nobody's ever there. Like, literally, they, like, have water, like, waiting for people to come. This past time, I was like, I'm going to run right in. I have my kids. And there was a line. You couldn't get in the door. And this was for a primary or whatever this last one was that nobody would have ever paid attention, right?
Huge primary, yeah.
With that, I live over on the Kansas side, so our same politician that's won every single time lost to Sharice Davis. And I was very lucky that I got to see how she marketed, and since I'm obsessed with marketing, I got to see how she did that and how she let people have a voice that she didn't. She was sending out everything in my neighborhood in both English and Spanish. And the other candidate, Yoder, who I actually know from college when he was a Democrat, he didn't send one thing out to my neighborhood, and he didn't send one thing out in the other neighborhoods in Spanish. So he was just going with this as Johnson County, and so many people showed up, and so many people made a change. And so I do think that we finally feel like we have a voice to make a change.
Or we're not gonna wait anymore.
Yeah.
No easy way to wrap this up. Ruby, Sam, Nicholas has now entered into the studio. There's been another episode of Level 3 Studio, a.k.a. Chef Jay's Kitchen. Wow. I don't know, this is just really good. I'm excited. There's a lot to do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
This has been great. Peace.
We out.